2012. I'd like to call for a round of applause for all the teams who have made it so far. Now I would like to introduce the judges for this debate. They are Veronica from Slovakia, chef judge for today's debate, and Nay from Romania, Engin Arkan from Turkey, Konrad from Poland, Samonovak from Slovenia, Roger Hadrich from Korea, Marcel Mark from Turkey, we have proposition team from Anglo-Chinese Junior College. First speaker is Annabel 10. Their second speaker is Agrim Singh. Speaker is Rabin. And we have opposition team from LGS. Their first speaker is Murtaza Çöp. The second speaker is Ömer Ashar. And their third speaker is Farget Savo. Also, the motion for this debate, this house believe that states are justified in ignoring civil liberties in their fight against terrorism. It gives me great pleasure to invite the first speaker for the proposition team to open the debate. Please welcome.
What is the fight against terrorism today? It is one that is hard to preempt. It is one that we need to protect our lives of our own citizens and make sure that the innocent do not die because of the inaction of the government. But first, a few key definitions. Civil liberties refers to certain liberties that are given to citizens of democratic nations, such as the freedom of choice to choose affiliation, freedom of speech, or privacy of different types, which are given to citizens to allow them certain freedoms and liberties. However, it's only relevant in liberal democracies, where the states respect and these rights are actually meaningful. Terrorists are people who use methods of extreme violence, who massacre the innocent lives of the people, and also strike fear in the hearts of everyone else in the public society today, in order to achieve certain outcomes which are often their own selfish aims. Their fight, it can't be just solved with retributive justice, but also needs to be resolved by preemptive and protective measures for our citizens. Our policy is simple. We're not going to ignore civil liberties, such as ignoring every single civil liberty. There are definitely going to be restrictions on this. We're only going to ignore certain civil liberties in certain specific situations which can be determined and established by individual governments and parliaments, where it can be certain liberties such as the ability to be having a trial before you are detained, or perhaps censoring of terrorist rhetoric, which should be allowed so that you don't allow for the propagation of their rhetoric. We think that in this case, you allow for the legislation of regulations so that you can ignore certain specific liberties in these instances to allow for a more efficient process for tackling and fighting against these terrorists. We believe that citizens and civilians can challenge no user in the court or through the ballot box if need be, and they feel that their civil liberties are being denied from them altogether. We think that this is all in the aim to allow for mechanisms in the government to preempt and fight terrorists. We think this debate is going to be about whether or not the threat of terrorism justifies the abrogation of certain civil liberties, and also whether these methods and mechanisms we're going to bring forth to the House today are actually going to be effective. We're going to prove to you three lines of argumentation. Firstly, that we're going to protect the most important lives in society. Secondly, that we're going to be practically efficient in our policy and in our model. And my second speaker, Agrim, will be talking to you about how to reduce self-radicalization of potential terrorists. Now to my first point, about protecting the most important rights in society. Hold on a minute, sir. The thesis for this argument is that it's principally justified to limit the civil liberties of potential and current terrorists in order to protect the rights of the vast majority. Under this, I have two layers. Firstly, on the duty to protect people, and secondly, on the utilitarian calculus of this principle. But first, yes, sir.
If team government's idea is that terrorism is hard to preempt, then are they going to take away rights on the basis and the assumption that terrorism might happen someday?
We don't do this on the assumption. We know that it may happen someday. We know that it's going to strike us when we least expect it. And this is how terrorists operate. We think that governments can restrict certain civil liberties of these terrorists when need be, and under certain situations which governments can define for themselves. We don't think this is going to harm the civil liberties of the vast majority of society. However, it also maintains the right of these people to live without fear for as much as possible. And I'm going to prove this through my 2 points, and you can just listen up for that. Now to my first sub-tier under this point, about the duty to protect people. The state's duty is to protect people in society from harm which can be potentially caused by these terrorists. We think that innocent people are at stake when you allow terrorists to run free and lose havoc on civilians in society today. We want to protect the honest civilians, the men and women who are being attacked from just because they're part of an objective that these terrorists are going to fulfill. This is an extreme threat that is too dangerous for an action, and we need to take certain precautions and certain measures. So it's proven that when certain individuals have been proven to have affiliations or who are terrorists in themselves, it is right and actually justified to curb certain their liberties and actually use certain techniques in order to maintain some information and gain intelligence for our country in order to protect the rights of the vast majority of people. We think that limiting and taking away these certain civil liberties of these people is justified and is justifiably benefits the rest of society. But to the second tier, about the utilitarian calculus of this principle. The right to life enables all other rights to function, including those of our civil liberties. Which means that if you want the fundamental right to live, you need to protect it first, and then allow this in order to allow for the rest of the liberties you have in society. So there's a need to prioritize this. If someone is going to attack your civilians, and you know that the rights of certain people are restricted in order to allow for the maximization of rights and the liberties of the rest, you know that you can actually curb certain things, and this is the utilitarian calculus of this principle of saving lives and the duty of the government. No, thank you, sir. Therefore, it's principally justified to limit the civil liberties of potential and current terrorists to protect the rights of the vast majority. But to the second substantive argument, about the practical efficacy in winning the fight against terrorism. No, thank you, sir. The thesis for this argument is that it's practically efficacious to fight terrorism with certain mechanisms that go against civil liberties of particular people. There's a need for prevention. It's not enough to wait and have retributive action once you finally got this terrorist, or actually realize too late, hold on a minute, sir, that thousands of people have died because of the terrorist attack, as it happened in 9/11. But before I move on to this rest point, yes, ma'am.
So then how by the end of it does team government ensure lives to these people by curtailing their civil liberties?
I'm going to prove that right now in my substantive as I show you how certain mechanisms allow for intelligence to gain information and then allow for actions to be taken to curb the attacks by these terrorist groups. So here we see that under time pressures, when it's necessary to find information as fast as possible, certain mechanisms like say interrogation techniques, which perhaps use enhanced interrogation techniques to ensure that people actually give out some information so they can actually know where the bomb is going to be, how to best stop it, no time to sir. Or even in situations where it's more long drawn out, you need certain intelligence which can only be found when you have certain links or ties to organizations, and then you use these people and their affiliations to find out where the root cause is. So it's an existential threat that terrorists are facing to us, which is unlike anything that we've seen before, and it needs appropriate response to it. On opposition side, what do they have? They have so far a slow process which allows people who are terrorists to hide and skirt the fight that we place to them in trying to deter terrorists from attacking our own borders. Terrorists are already indoctrinated, they're radicalized, and they're not willing to compromise that easily with whatever measures they have in opposition, which would normally be court cases, which are long drawn out and allow for the rhetoric of these terrorists to be spewed out in front of an open courtroom. Rather, they actually allow for these people not to be detained because they want to protect their civil liberties. So you let terrorists run free instead of curtailing their rights and ensuring the rights of the rest of civilian society. So we see that they intend to give certain liberties, which is at the expense of those in society. One side of proposition, what do we better fight? We better fight this because we recognize the spectrum of people who are in these terrorist organizations. We recognize the indistinct links and hierarchies within these organizations and the need to evolve and adapt to these battlegrounds. We see that detention without trial is being used in Singapore and America, where it can be used to normalize and reiterate terrorists and detain the terrorists so that they do not attack the citizens of the country. Jihad Islami was prevented from a potential attack on Singapore railway lines because we actually knew information prior to the fact of their attack. Furthermore, we've seen that interrogations by Mossad on Hezbollah terrorists in their hands allow for intelligence to know where the operations were back in 2009. So there's a need for specific links and intelligence that can't be found under any other ways or any other mechanisms that opposition may like to ask, may like you to refer to. So we actually break the cycle and break the wheel because they need to regroup, they need to think of different methods which are not already known by the intelligence agencies in our government today. So in the end, we actually break apart their structure. We also cause the problem to actually be minimized. So in the end, we prove it to you that it's principally justified to save the rights of the majority, as well as how we're practically effective in actually destroying terrorist links and bring the fight straight to them. So please go, recite proposition.
I thank the first opposition speaker for their speech, and now to open the case for the opposition, I call upon their first
So, ladies and gentlemen, they came up here and they talked about how they're going to, curb the liberties of these terrorists. And that was essentially what their case revolved around. They said, terrorists are people who spread fear into the hearts of people and strike fear into the hearts of people, but it's hard to preempt who exactly these terrorists are. So, ladies and gentlemen, and then they went on to say, well, we're going to curb their civil liberties because, well, they're terrorists. Now, the first thing we have to say to that is, ladies and gentlemen, when it's hard to preempt who these terrorists are, and by virtue of the fact that you're declaring terrorists those people who say something against the government, ladies and gentlemen, who are potentially voice their opinions and they may not be in line with the government, ladies and gentlemen, may want some change within the government, ladies and gentlemen, under their definition, those people would also be deemed terrorists because they are propagating a certain sentiment which might bring for change that is not in line with the government, ladies and gentlemen. And under that definition, what essentially you're doing is that you're giving the government the right to exploit their control over civil liberties at the end of the day. Because now you can take these people under the notion of suspicion and torture them in whatever way you please, ladies and gentlemen, under their model. Because they weren't very clear as to what they'd be doing. They said, we have terrorists. These terrorists are people who strike fear into the hearts of people and who strike fear into the hearts of people. That in itself, ladies and gentlemen, is very subjective. And they needed to set out a distinct criteria as to what this essentially is at the end of the day. Because by that logic, what they're saying is that now states have the room for abuse, that they could take anyone in on suspicion and use whatever techniques they like, ladies and gentlemen. They need to give us a yardstick as to what measure or to what degree would this terrorism be there and to what degree can you compromise on civil liberties at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. We still don't know. Then they talked about how these terrorists do not deserve to have civil liberties. But before moving on to that, yes.
Sir, if a terrorist had information about the location of a bomb which would kill thousands of people, would you use torture or let people die?
I'll be coming to that, ladies and gentlemen, in my own positive case. But the example to that, but the simple thing to that is that torture is not going to do you any good. We have places such as Guantanamo Bay, ladies and gentlemen, but they have been using torture and they haven't gotten much out of them because after a certain degree of torture, those people lose their memories essentially, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not so easy to make these terrorists crack at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. It's not like you say that we're going to waterboard you once and they give in at the end of the day because they follow an ideology. They're fundamentalists of a particular ideology. And for team proposition to come up and think that they'll crash if you say that, well, we're going to show you a knife is fundamentally wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that that is essentially flawed on their part because what they're saying is that you could take anyone on suspicion at the end of the day and they expect these torture techniques which are gross compromise of human rights at the end of the day, and they expect these people to spill over everything that has been that they have been doing, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that that within the status quo does not happen in any case, ladies and gentlemen. Then they talked about protection and they said, you know what, we're taking a protective measure because we want to protect society at large. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that for them to say that you let terrorists run free is a gross exaggeration of what already the mechanisms within the status quo exist and what they do, ladies and gentlemen. You have ways within which you can verify intelligence on these terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have to torture them to get this intelligence out. You can give them a free trial, ladies and gentlemen. Please sit down. And that is something I'll be talking about within my own positive case, which I will be coming to now. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, in two things that fundamentally I'll be talking about. Firstly, the whole paradigm of justice and how you're going to be undermining that and human rights as well. And secondly, I'll be talking about the subjectivity of terrorism and what is deemed a terrorist and how you're giving states the right to abuse that. But before moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we need a clarification as to which state can intervene and take these terrorists in at the end of the day. Is it only the host nation where these terrorists reside that can question these terrorists at the end of the day? Or can it be any state putting on foreign intervention? For example, can the USA come in and take an Afghani terrorist and question him and torture him to any degree to get out the information that they think he might potentially have, ladies and gentlemen? Something that they need to clarify, that they needed to clarify from the get-go. But moving on to my positive case, ladies and gentlemen, the whole paradigm of the global justice system and human rights. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the whole paradigm of justice within the world today is that you're innocent until you're proven guilty, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that since you suspect people of being guilty, ladies and gentlemen, you need to adequately prove beyond reasonable doubt that they are guilty to a certain degree, ladies and gentlemen. For you to say that, well, we might think he's a terrorist, and to undermine the whole paradigm of justice, not only justice, but human rights, ladies and gentlemen, by compromising on these rights that people within the UN have sat down and agreed upon that every human being possesses, regardless of his qualities, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that is extremely unjust on-side proposition today, ladies and gentlemen. Please sit down. We believe that we're going to uphold this model of proving people guilty. If they are guilty, ladies and gentlemen, then we can have proper accountability measures for them, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that in most cases, as they're saying, that they're misrepresenting the fact that all terrorists would know where a bomb blast is happening, ladies and gentlemen, because in most terrorist cells, in most sleeper cells, ladies and gentlemen, terrorists are not even related to the centralized structure of the terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. If they are caught, they don't know anything or they don't know about the next plans. They only know about the plan that they were allocated or they were forwarded at the end of the day. Because in most sleeper cells, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is that you're not in direct contact with your centralized government of these terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. What essentially happens is that you're just given orders as to what you as an individual terrorist will particularly do. So essentially you don't have important information about your terrorist organization or your terrorist cell to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. But under their model, they would torture these people and they would not uphold the civil liberties granted to these people, ladies and gentlemen, simply because they might feel that he is under suspicion or that he might know something, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that you're undermining the sanctity of human life. You're undermining the sanctity of what, please sit down, sir, you're undermining the sanctity of that the human rights give to a person in terms of his dignity at the end of the day. Which leads me on to my second line of argument, ladies and gentlemen, the subjectivity of terrorism. We need to realize that in most cases, organizations that are deemed terrorist, ladies and gentlemen, to one party may not be terrorist organizations to another party. Please sit down. A relevant example, ladies and gentlemen, is that of Hezbollah, which is deemed a political party within its own nation, but is deemed as a terrorist organization by the USA itself, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that under their model, there is so much ambiguity because now, even if Hezbollah's home country does not want to do anything against them, the USA has the legitimacy to compromise the sovereignty of that very country actually take away people from Hezbollah and torture them into getting whatever information they might need or whatever information they might potentially feel that they have at the end of the day. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that there should be a concrete way of defining what a terrorist is under their model, ladies and gentlemen, because even in the world today, there is no concrete definition. It's left up to the subjectivity of governments, and if you haven't set a criteria as to which government would take what action, then what you're essentially doing is that you're giving every government legitimacy to go into any country and capture anyone who they might potentially feel is a terrorist and then harm their human rights at the end of the day. Something that is a very dangerous precedent for team proposition to set at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that if you follow their model, you're going to be undermining the whole paradigm of the legal justice system that exists within the status quo, and you're going to be putting a dent on the human rights that have already been established, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that for all those reasons, you should vote for team opposition.
Continue the case for the proposition, I postpone their second speaker.
We're debating with a side which understands the risks and problems that exist in today's society, but fail to do anything to combat these problems and deal with them before they manifest in society. In this slide, I'm going to ask 3 questions. Firstly, does our policy have the checks and balances they say we don't? The answer is yes. Secondly, are we right in giving up some liberties for collective security of the society? The answer is yes. And lastly, does abrogation of civil liberties help fight terrorism? The answer is also yes. So let's look at the first question of checks and balances within our society. And this is where they fundamentally fail to listen to the policy that Annabel set up. We told you who exactly are these terrorists. Terrorists are people who use violence, who murder innocent people in society, not people like political opponents, especially like liberal democracies where people are allowed to voice their opinions against other political parties. So obviously they got the definition of terrorists wrong right from the get-go. The second thing they told us about was intervention, and they said that we'll take away the sovereignty of nation. No thank you, sir. Again, firstly, we think this isn't really the case because it talks about states dealing with internal security matters. Secondly, even if this was the case, such as what happens in extraordinary rendition, is usually agreed to by both nations. The US usually talks to the nation before it takes away political prisoners from those societies. So it's perfectly legitimate if intervention takes place or it doesn't take place. The last thing that it told us under this was that nations usually have subjective values that they put with regard to particular societies. Maybe like Hezbollah is a political party in one society and might be a terroristic outfit in another. Firstly, we tell you this subjectivity is inherently false. Why? Because this subjectivity, as they might say, is based on particular flaw. Like if you have bomb-making material with you, this is not subjective. You are trying to make a bomb. If you are voicing our radical opinion and radical propaganda in your society, on the web, all over the place, this isn't subjective. This is particularly prevalent that with Hezbollah, who tries bombing, points missiles to other nations, and tries no thank you sirs, and tries telling that then we will blow you up if you cause any problems or if you go against what we try to tell you. So this isn't subjective, guys. This is something that is inherent, and this is something that's pretty obvious. I'm moving to my second area on clash. Then, is this really justified on a principle level? We told you that we will take away the rights of the people based on the probability, but only after clear intent is established to carry out such a threat. And we can see this intent that comes about through all the videos they give out, through all the racist rhetoric they might spray out, through all the religious propaganda messages that come out. This sort of thing does not exist for political opponents, so they need to clash with us on the definition we provided to them. Secondly, they fail to rebut our analysis on the principle of life as a wellspring for all your other rights. We tell you that unless you are alive, you cannot really have all your other rights you need to actualize in society. They told us terrorists have rights. Firstly, tell you, no. The moment you start killing thousands and thousands of people, we tell you you've given up your right to live as an individual because you've deprived more than 1,000 people of their right to live. Secondly, we tell you, even if we tell you that these people are probably guilty, tell you the guilt being probable versus the rights of many to live and survive in society is something that we need in our society. And therefore, terrorists lose these rights. They need to deal with us on a principle analysis before they can hit us on practical. I'm moving to my third area of clash on how the abrogation necessarily allows us to fight terrorism. Firstly, they told us, and a POI, that torture is an ineffective means because it doesn't really help track terrorists. Firstly, we tell you, torture isn't the only mean in a toolkit that we specified to begin with. It's just an extra tool, and if it's properly used in the best means possible, it does give us results. We've seen this in extraordinary rendition cases of Abdul Hamid, who told us of a bomb plot that was about to take place because he was indeed the underwear bomber who planned to blow up the Detroit International Airport. So we've seen that these tools have worked, and these tools have given us proper results. They cannot challenge the empirical evidence that stands against them. Second thing we tell you under this, that not all terrorists are hardcore. If they really wanted to not tell us that these things are wrong and they didn't want to crack under pressure, this wouldn't happen because not all terrorists are so fundamentally tied to whatever beliefs they will talk about. What did they tell us to deal with these problems? They said that we need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that a terrorist is a terrorist, and only then they'll deal with it. Firstly, they deal with problems after they've happened, so people will die regardless of whatever policy they apply. Secondly, beyond reasonable doubt. The fact that this policy has to go on for months, I'll take it in a minute, sir, to go on for months before they can actually establish that someone is a terrorist and prosecute him for the crime that has already happened, shows the kind of harms that will exist in the society, shows how many people will die in the society. Do you disagree?
An individual who is ready to blow himself up, what toolkit does team government have that is deterrence enough for that individual to come clean?
Sir, if people are hardcore and plan to blow them up, this will happen in either case, okay? When people are on the brink of changing to terrorism, we think our policy deals with it. I'll address that in my substantive. Lastly, I tell you that even if we have people who plan to blow themselves up, the terrorists don't operate in isolationist, they always work in groups. And if you work in groups, and if you can find out who the terrorist is and which circle or sleeper cell is operating in, you can close down other terrorist plots that can go about before you actually create more damage and more possible harm. I'm moving to my practical argumentation for today on how our policy reduces self-radicalization among potential terrorists. The thesis of my argument is this. By showing potential terrorists that the state is willing to give no quarter to the fight of terrorism, we reduce the incidences of self-radicalization. The premise of my argument is this. An individual who has come to believe in terrorist rhetoric wants to embrace a radical doctrine, and this conclusion can be met through many means. Firstly, he might see it as a justification to social problems that might exist, or secondly, he just might believe that radical doctrines are possibly right. Now, every single individual who chooses to embrace a particular belief weighs up in his mind on one hand the power of the belief, and on the other, the risk of embracing such a belief. What happens under their model, where the hands of the states are tied because they can't take away civil liberties? The risks of embracing a particular radical doctrine are often not enough as an individual can now just embrace whatever doctrine that he or she might believe in. Because of the civil liberties that protect the people in society altogether. And the terrorists use this as a shield to cover up anything that they might want to do because the government cannot actively crack down on them. This is also seen as a soft response by the government because the government isn't doing enough to deal with terrorist rhetoric and terrorism on a whole. So this means that individuals are more likely to continue embracing such doctrines to the point they are willing to engage in murderous violence to a point of no return. We've seen this in places like Norway, where the government couldn't do anything because they refused to crack down on civil liberties, and they couldn't stop people like Annabel, who was openly buying fertilizers to set a bomb and blow it up in the streets of Oslo, something that he intended doing and something that he did do a week after he was caught doing this. This is bad and we can't stand for such ideas. So what happens in our model? In our model, let me show you that we don't give any quarter in this war of terrorism. We are willing to go to great extents to ensure that innocent men, women and children don't die, and this shifts the balance of incentives to not being a terrorist. Yes, we realize that the most hardcore individuals will choose to go either way, but we will be able to save a vast majority of individuals who are sitting on the brink of radicalism. We've seen this becomes crucial in times when Al-Qaeda is putting up radical propaganda on the web and trying to deceive individuals into joining its religious radical extremism views. And thus individuals see them as availability of opportunities. A strong government stance, on the other hand, which is not willing to give any quarter to such terrorism ideas and willing to go to any lengths to deal with this, shifts the balance of incentives, and now people consider the potential harms before they can consider the possible benefits that come about it, and thus don't become terrorists to begin with. While we believe in the strong government stance, we also believe in working with religious leaders, social services to examine the root causes of problems and thus combat them. And therefore, our policy stands. What have I shown you today? We are principally justified in having these rights removed to ensure the greater societal safety. For all these reasons, go with Team Proposition.
Continue the case for the opposition. I will count their seconds.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it is unbelievably funny how Team Proposition, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day undermines the entire global paradigm of justice. It is absolutely amazing, ladies and gentlemen, when we hear that Team Proposition here at the end, they realize that after cost-benefit analysis, you are achieving little, but you are compromising on much. They realize that at the end of the day, you are not protecting the sanctity of life. They realize at the end of the day that you are compromising on basic human rights that exist for every single person. And they realize that there is a highly likely chance that at the end of the day, that particular assumed terrorist might not give up. That at the end of the day, he might not give up to torture, and that at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, that particular terrorist might not even have substantial information which they're trying to extract. So after simple cost-benefit analysis, ladies and gentlemen, we realize how their entire argument regarding the fact of ignoring civil liberties goes down the drain. So that was just the start, ladies and gentlemen. Let me move on. Now, what exactly did they talk to us about? They talked about how checks and balances exist, ladies and gentlemen, and how they, at the end of the day, will start
information.
Sit down. So then, at the end of the day, start putting wearing people behind bars who committed murders and violence. Well, it's already bad in society, so you will be subjected to being behind bars, ladies and gentlemen. So what is the point of torturing people who commit murders and violence because they're already behind bars, ladies and gentlemen? That is completely different and completely irrelevant from sit down, sir. Completely irrelevant from the entire idea of extracting information and saving a billion lives, which was the entire examples they gave to us to prove that argument was irrelevant, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, they also talk about how collective security comes into play, and to that we have simple. It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of the day, you are not achieving enough, ladies and gentlemen. You are at the end of the day not ensuring that you will make events of the highest order and extract the right information, because you cannot be sure whether that particular terrorist, even if he gives up the information, even if, ladies and gentlemen, you are not sure if that particular event will take place, because at the end of the day, these terrorist organizations do change plans, ladies and gentlemen, because they also have a working dilemma. They also, ladies and gentlemen, have an entire communication with their particular hired person, and how they communicate with the ones do come to know that particular person is no longer in contact. They will definitely, ladies and gentlemen, change their plans. So the entire aspect, the working dilemma of these particular terrorist organizations comes into play. The entire aspect of torturing and ignoring civil liberties goes down again. So ladies and gentlemen, that done. They also know how torture and how these ignoring civil liberties would actually help. When we talk about that, we have to PUI that, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, these particular people who are ready to blow themselves up, ladies and gentlemen, who are ready to give their lives away, ladies and gentlemen, who at the end of the day are ready to die for whatever cause they may be, how will they give up that piece of information? How at the end of the day are going to ensure that you will extract that information for your own use? Something of proposition still has a answer, ladies and gentlemen. Sit down, sir. So with that done, they also talk about the radicalistic notions, ladies and gentlemen. Well, to that we have simple to say, ladies and gentlemen, that in the status quo, you already have hate speech banned, ladies and gentlemen. You already have anyone who incites people to terror, anyone who incites people to terror is already, sit down, madam, is already present in status quo, ladies and gentlemen. So how at the end of the day can you talk about radicalistic notions, ladies and gentlemen? They talk about how government's hands are tied and how they cannot act. But to that we have to say that even without ignoring civil liberties, we in the status quo have at the end of the day managed to cut down on terrorist activities by being in the field, ladies and gentlemen, by trying to put an end to these terrorist organizations by taking practical steps in the field rather than ignoring civil liberties. Something I'll talk about in positive ways as well. I'll move on when it takes its speed.
Sir, you believe in absolute liberty, yet you concede that we should ban hate speech and absolute freedom of speech. How do you reconcile?
So, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't talk about absolute liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, in the status quo, every civilian, every person has liberty, but does not want to start killing people. And for that, we believe that there are reasonable restrictions to everything that comes with the state. Similarly, ladies and gentlemen, to these techniques of torture and to these techniques of extraction, reasonable restrictions apply which protect the sanctity of these human beings. Moreover, they have to show to us how, at the end of the day, putting an end to the liberty, ladies and gentlemen, can solve how putting an end to the liberty of that particular terrorist can solve the problem, which was actually mentioned in their entire definition. So with that done, ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to my life part. So what I'm talking about how at the end of the day an abuse of power takes place, ladies and gentlemen, when you're allowing the government to ignore the civil liberties, and how at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, in the status quo, these particular countries are actually engaging to cut down terrorist activities. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's talk about abuse of power. Sit down, sir. So what do we see? We see how at the end of the day these particular governments, ladies and gentlemen, they can use this entire idea and notion of ignoring civil liberties to their own cause. They could actually use their vested interest to catch anyone up, beat them up, ladies and gentlemen, torture them under the cover that at the end of the day they are governed that this particular person is a terrorist and that they ignore their civil liberties. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, this at the end of the day would definitely be an abuse of power, because these governments, these particular people can use this to their advantage to start torturing innocent people who at the end of the day might serve their vested interests, ladies and gentlemen. And this is where it comes in the entire corrupt structure of the bureaucrats, and how at the end of the day the entire structure kicks in which the corruption comes into play, and how this abuse of power takes place in trying to put an end to the civil liberties to start torturing innocent people and swaying them to the favor. It is funny how at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, in opposition They talk about how there are checks and balances in play and how you can't just pick up anything from you can handle. We talk about the corruption that exists. We talk about the substandards that exist in bureaucrats, ladies and gentlemen. We talk about how at the end of the day, the entire these structures and these techniques, ladies and gentlemen, they are entailed with corruption. They entail, ladies and gentlemen, substandards and how that would actually end up in these people, in the abuse of power, and how governments and people, particularly people, start using this to their own advantage and start torturing innocent people to serve their own vested interests. So with that, and ladies and gentlemen, let me talk about how in the sit down. So with that, and let me talk about how the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, we already have governments, ladies and gentlemen, who are working to cut down, ladies and gentlemen, on terrorist activities. We realize how, without ignoring civil liberties, ladies and gentlemen, we realize how at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of other ways to put an end to terrorists. How there are checkposts involved, ladies and gentlemen, that check you once you enter cities and once you go out of cities. How at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, how at the end of the day you're bringing out you're putting security cameras. How at the end of the day you're putting the entire structure and notion of security cameras, and how at the end of the day you check people before they enter buildings to prevent some sort of prevent them from planting bombs and whatnot. And how at the status quo we believe the problem is being solved, and how we're cutting down terrorist activities in England, in France, in Germany, ladies and gentlemen, given the fact that we're doing this without ignoring the sanctity of human life and by not undermining the global paradigm of justice, which we're first to talk about. So what I've shown you how at the end of the day the entire notion of radicalism goes down the drain. I've shown you, ladies and gentlemen, how at the end of the day you're not protecting life, because after a cost-benefit analysis, you're tortured and you're ignoring civil liberties. Not only undermines global paradigm of justice, but after a cost-benefit analysis, you're torturing people, but you're not getting enough, ladies and gentlemen. How totally the abuse of power does exist and will be used by the people arbitrarily. How at the end of the day the status quo we already have. And all those down, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to vote for team LGS team opposition.
Opposition speaker for his speech, and now to conclude the case for the proposition, I propose their third speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, when everything our civilization holds dear faces an existential threat which would deny us all rights to liberty and to life, we can't stand by and do nothing. I'm going to show you how our side's policy has answered three main questions of this debate. First of all, are we right in giving up some liberties for security? Second, can checks work in protecting liberty for the ordinary citizen? And finally, does abrogating civil liberties help fight terrorism? So on to the first area of clash. Is it right? And I'd like to point out here that they've made a concession to us. They conceded to us that some liberties can be given up and restricted by governments when it's needed to protect harm to life, especially in the context of terrorism. They told us that they would stop hate speech. By this logic, they would censor terrorist freedom of expression to stop them broadcasting over the airways. We say that this shows that they believe in the restriction of civil liberties when it's necessary in the fight against terrorism, and their principle is the same as ours. But I'm going to elaborate on our principle and show you how they failed to deal, with the material that we brought up. We told you how the right of many individuals is more important than the rights of a few probable terrorists. Societies often can't protect both. Rigid court systems mean an inability to stop terrorism fast enough. And we asked the question, why should innocent men, women, and children be put at risk to protect the rights of an individual who's probably a terrorist because he's a known radical and he's bought potassium nitrate, a key bomb-making material? We asked this question and they never really answered it. Well, thank you. We asked the second question. We told you that life is more important than other civil liberties, and therefore governments are justified in restricting some of these liberties when they put life at risk, because life enables you to make all other choices. The right to vote, well, thank you, the right to self-actualize and do what you believe is right with your life, and you don't have all these rights when you're dead, and terrorism poses an existential threat to the lives of all our citizens. We told you that that right is more important, we should sacrifice more to protect it. You've never given us a response. So on to the second question of this debate. Can checks work in balancing liberty with the need to protect life? Here they told us about political opposition, and this was their main argument against restriction of choice. They told us that governments would take individuals and beat them up under the premise of preventing terrorism. And we told you that this debate has to take place in liberal democracies. Why? Because other states, dictatorships, or states where democracies are corrupt and weak would ignore civil liberties anyway, in all cases. And we tell you that in liberal democracies, the vote, the court, the ballot box, the media, and the marketplace of public opinion prevents governments from doing all the harms they've just proposed. They told us that governments are going to catch people unfairly on the premise of being terrorists. I'll take you in a moment, sir. But if they do that in a liberal democracy, the courts will catch them. Go ahead.
The idea for suicide bombing is that the person who's killed those many people is already dead. So what is team government really trying to achieve by the end of it?
Precisely, sir. That's why we have preventive detention, which restricts the civil liberty to a trial to make sure that this suicide bomber cannot go into a public square and blow himself up in the first place. We gave you that example. You haven't really rebutted it yet. Their next argument against checks and balances was subjectivity. And they told us that terrorism is inherently a subjective activity. We told you in Agrim and in Annabel that we have clear metrics to determine when someone is probably guilty and when someone is not. If you say that Islam is a better religion than Christianity, we aren't going to detain you or torture you, because it's your perfect right to do that. But if you buy materials to make a bomb, if you got repeated contact with known radicals, and if you go to Afghanistan's Helmand province, we think that you're probably a terrorist after doing all these things. Existing acts like the Patriot Act and the UK's Prevention of Terrorism Act already use such metrics, and while we concede that it's fair to detain individuals on the basis of probability, given this existential threat, we've provided clear metrics to determine when such probabilities are high enough. No, thank you. They told us that innocents will be detained. We tell you that this is regrettable and we will do everything in our power to minimize it. But we tell you that this happens under their model too. Because even in the court system, sometimes individuals get caught, especially in their case, when they don't have any means. They don't have wiretapping, they don't have surveillance by which they can properly determine who are really terrorists and who aren't terrorists. Because terrorists don't communicate using mainstream media and mainstream modes of communication. They communicate subversively. We tell you that we'll minimize the number of innocents detained as much as possible, and we tell you that these harms, so thank you, accrue in their system as well. Then we came down to the final and most important clash of debate. Does the abrogation of civil rights help fight terrorism better than all the alternatives? And here we discussed a few means of fighting terrorism, and they told us that things like torture, for instance, won't work. We told you that torture, well, thank you, when properly regulated, when properly carried out by trained interrogators, can work. Because torture isn't just about beating an individual over the head. It's about creating an environment which makes him more pliable and more likely to give us the information we need. We told you that we don't always need to use torture. Torture is just one tool in a toolbox that governments have to combat terrorism, and preventive measures like preventive detention, or thank you, which are still a restriction of civil rights, are sometimes better. But in any case, we say that torture is better than doing nothing, which is what happens on their side. Because by their own characterization, if they were radical who believes firmly in his cause, he's more likely, no thank you, to crack under torture than to crack when a policeman sits in front of him with a hot cup of coffee, something which happens on their side. They told us that we would torture those who are already guilty. And we say, no, no thank you. We don't simply torture people whenever we like. We torture people only insofar as it's necessary. And that was the point of Agrim's example. About Abdul Hamid, the underwear bomber, we managed to find out this information and stop the bombing because we preventively detained him before he bombed Detroit airport. No thank you. They told us that terrorist organizations are centralized and therefore our measures can't work. Now, this is quite funny, because this is actually an argument for why we need to restrict civil liberties to fight terrorism. Precisely because terrorist organizations aren't centralized. We can't fight them in the way we normally fight criminal organizations. We don't always know who their leaders are, where their leaders are, and how to take them out. Rather, random individuals, no thank you, carry out targeted attacks in society. So we can't wait for intelligence to lead us to terrorist leaders. We must identify individuals who are probably radicals and preemptively detain them, which, though a violation of civil rights, is necessary to protect our society. Go ahead.
So team, government is willing to torture someone on the probability that he might be a terrorist. Please show to us how that is moral within their rights.
Sir, we have told you that we are willing to torture individuals on the probability that he might be a terrorist. But we have shown you as well that we have very strict conditions for when these probabilities can be applied. We told you clear metrics we can use to do this, and if you feel these metrics aren't strict enough, in a liberal democracy, you can challenge them in the courts. And here you told us about how court systems are powerful enough to stop terrorists. We say that this isn't so. Courts are long protected, drawn out, and can't find the evidence needed to convict terrorists and give terrorists a way to expose their rhetoric to the public, radicalizing more individuals. We talked about preventive detention, which helps detain terrorists who are probably guilty and otherwise would have bombed public spaces, like Ilyas Fadila, the preemptively detained terrorist who would otherwise have set a bomb beneath Jerusalem's western wall. We told you that their system cannot gather evidence under a purely court system because courts cannot grant warrants on the basis of probability, something we need to do to protect ourselves against terrorists because of the existential threat and because of the way in which terrorists operate. Wiretapping enables us to know when and where terrorist attacks will take place. The September 11th attack was discovered by Echelon, but the US wasn't able to act on it because of the restrictive laws which tied governments' hands in the name of civil liberty. And they've never rebutted Agrim's argument about decreasing radicalization. They've conceded to us, they've changed their case, and we've shown you that the way terrorists operate and the threat they pose to our society justifies our use of these metrics, and we can protect ordinary citizens from being trampled on at the same time. Go with proposition.
for his speech, and now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon their participants.
the deterrence team government has for that individual is torture. Quantify the logic, ladies and gentlemen. Does it file up? No, it does not. The same argument the team opposition has been very consistent in, never answered by team government within this debate. No, wait, they said this one thing. We're going to make those chambers very specific. We're going to make them comfortable for those terrorists so that they feel at home when we're torturing them. Is that going to extract the information out of them? No, it is not, ladies and gentlemen, because those people believe in a fundamental ideology, something they've already conceded to. So is torture a big enough deterrence to break down that fundamental ideology? Team government needs to answer that. Team government still hasn't answered that question within the course of this debate. 3 issues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, they talk to you about this entire idea of protection of lives. Secondly, they talk to you about this entire notion of how their model is practically efficient. And thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, they talk to you about this idea of radicalization. I will tell you how all 3 of these issues are essentially inconsistent. But before I do that, sit down, let me tell you why team opposition wins this debate. Number 1, we talked to you about this entire notion of reasonable restrictions on rights, ladies and gentlemen, that the government puts on reasonable restrictions but can't curtail civil liberties, ladies and gentlemen, because even within a court of law, a murderer is not guilty, is innocent before proven guilty, ladies and gentlemen. That is how high they keep this, that is how high they keep the idea of civil liberties, ladies and gentlemen. That is how high a state keeps the idea of civil liberties. Team government still hasn't answered what their contention with that is. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we talked to you about this entire notion of subjectivity of terrorism and how within that you have, well, the abuse of power present, ladies and gentlemen, because most of these tools that they're handing over are to the third world countries where terrorism does exist on a mass scale, ladies and gentlemen, countries like Pakistan, for instance. So if they give them that tool, corrupt governments are going to use them against people, ladies and gentlemen, because they've conceded to the fact that they're going to take people on the probability that they might be terrorists and torture them. Isn't that abuse of power within itself? Team government hasn't answered that either. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, their entire, please sit down, stop badgering me. Their entire idea of torturing them on assumption, ladies and gentlemen, now we had a contention with that. Because under their model, they're going to go out on a street, if a person looks shady, they're going to pick him up and say, well, we think you're a terrorist, come to our torture cell, let's see what happens. Not happening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you why. Because then if that person is not guilty, then they've tortured an individual, curtailed his or her civil liberties, ladies and gentlemen, for no reason whatsoever. What is team government's justification for that? We still don't know. First issue within this debate, ladies and gentlemen, the idea of protection of lives. So they talked about how they're going to protect lives in a very efficient way because now they're taking people in on the assumption. Murtaza has already told you how these terrorists aren't interlinked and don't know everything about their organization. There are certain terrorist cells and there is a leader who delegates the information, ladies and gentlemen. So if you pick up a terrorist who only knows what his particular duty is, you really don't know, you're really not achieving anything. And on a second level, ladies and gentlemen, if you pick up a terrorist, question him, torture him, do whatever you want to under team propositions model, you're going to have 2 other terrorists who A are going to retaliate for the terrorists they've taken in, and number 2, they're going to do the job themselves. They're going to blow up in one particular place and still kill thousands of people. So what essentially is team government achieving? Because there will be terrorists present and there will be terrorists blowing people up, blowing places up, killing people. So is team government really saving lives? No, they are not, ladies and gentlemen. This argument falls in favor of team opposition. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen. They needed to show to us, I'll take you in a minute, they needed to show to us very consistently as to how if a state puts on restrictions and ignores civil liberties for these terrorists, how they are guaranteeing lives in the first place. This essential link with their principle was missing throughout the 3 speeches, ladies and gentlemen. They never showed to us how by ignoring civil liberties are they going to save lives by the end of the day. That issue falls in favor of team opposition. I will move on to the second issue after this POR.
We want to question you. What in the world is your model to protect and save lives, given so many limitations on the government to protect their citizens?
Essentially, we're talking about the status quo where you already have intervention, where you already have these have armies from states fighting these terrorists in northern areas within Pakistan and Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, and how they're doing a good enough job to stop these terrorists. Why take the measure that team government is proposing to convict people who might even be innocent? Because they still haven't shown to us how the people they're picking up on probability are going to turn out to be terrorists terrorists by the end of the day. Never shown to us by team government, falls in favor of team opposition.
Sir.
Second issue, sit down. Second issue, the entire notion of practical efficiency, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the first speaker came up and said, look, our model is going to be practically efficient because, well, we say so. We asked them this. Number one, if you're going to tell us how it's efficient, tell us how torture is going to be efficient, tell us how even if you take them into a court of law, how that is going to be efficient, tell us how questioning them is going to be efficient. Because we've already shown to you that a terrorist, a person who is willing to blow himself up, will not give in to torture. Death is not a big enough deterrence. How are you going to prove that torture is a big enough deterrent for that particular individual? Never shown to us by team government within this debate, ladies and gentlemen. On a second issue, if their idea is to catch someone who's already killed 10,000 people and eye for an eye was basically their ideology, then there's one problem with this. Everyone probably has heard the idea of a suicide bombing. Everyone knows what a suicide bombing is. The person who was involved in the suicide bombing is not alive anymore. So who is team government trying to catch within this debate? Please sit down. We still don't know, ladies and gentlemen. Are they going to bring in the dead body, extract information out of his mind? We don't know what they're trying to do by the end of it, which is why that becomes an inconsistency within their case, which falls in favor of opposition again. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, the last issue within this debate, they talk to you about this entire notion of radicalization and how people will essentially use their words to incite, I'll take you in a minute, to incite people, and then they will essentially move on and will aggravate people in order to create havoc within a country. I will elaborate on that after the show.
So under your model, suicide bombings continue taking place. Under our model, people don't die and the suicide bomber doesn't commit suicide because he's already caught before that.
Yes, they're saying that, well, we've caught the suicide bomber, but oh wait, we don't know if he's a suicide bomber because we're on the basis of probability, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations, you don't know he's a suicide bomber. So team government really isn't achieving anything. We as opposition have shown to you that that's really not going to happen. Moving on to the issue of radicalization by the end of it, ladies and gentlemen, we've shown to you that you have freedom of speech, but the government bans hate speech, ladies and gentlemen. Something that incites fear, incites violence, ladies and gentlemen. We've shown to you how those are reasonable restrictions on the basis of law. Something team government hasn't tackled within this debate, ladies and gentlemen. On the second level, we've shown to you how, well, if these people do use hate speech and if these terrorists do use hate speech, you can hold them accountable in the court of law because you already have laws telling you if you commit the crime of hate speech, you will end up in jail. That is the idea that team opposition was arguing. What have I shown you through the course of my debate? Number one, I have shown you that their entire notion of protection of lives is worse than the status quo itself. Because now what they're doing is that aggravating these terrorists even more, saying we've got one of yours, now show us what you're going to do. They're obviously going to blow up more people, ladies and gentlemen. That is the aggravation that on the first level we're talking about. Number two, if they think that on probability they take one person in, two other terrorists aren't going to do the same job for that person, they're very sadly mistaken, ladies and gentlemen, because that is bound to happen by the end of it. Something that we have proved to you. Secondly, the idea of practical efficiency goes down the drain because we've shown to you how torture is not a big enough deterrent, ladies and gentlemen, and how that individual who was attached to that notion of suicide bombing is no longer alive. So they're not achieving anything by the end of it on a second level. On a third level, we've shown to you that this entire notion of radicalization is already being stopped under the status quo. Why torture an individual for hate speech when you can hold him accountable in the court of law? And on all of those reasons, and on the reasons that all three issues that team government brought up have fallen by the end of this debate, opposition, LGS, consistent.
opposition speaker for his speech. Now we move to the teams formally to conclude the reply speeches. The opposition team will deliver their reply speech first. There are no points of information during reply speeches. After 3 minutes, the timekeeper will signal once to let the speaker know they have 1 minute left. After 4 minutes, the timekeeper will signal twice. To deliver the opposition reply speech, I call upon their first speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, is it justification enough that if someone plays dirty, that you are justified to play just as dirty and back at them? We believe no, ladies and gentlemen. And that is something that they've been propagating from the very start. They said, you know what, terrorists play dirty, they have these corrupt models, and therefore our government should follow a policy whereby it corrupts its models. We believe that that is unjustified, ladies and gentlemen, because in corrupting your own models, you are putting your innocent people's lives at stake, something that they set out to achieve and to guarantee the sanctity of life. But actually, at the end of the day, they're compromising that, ladies and gentlemen, because once you allow such a policy and its connotations to seep through your legal system, then let's see what the effects of it are. Pretty soon enough, you're not even going to need warrants to go into people's houses to check whether or not they're thieves or not, ladies and gentlemen, because that is something that you're following. You're saying that there should be no due process of law because now the state has the right to do anything to anyone, ladies and gentlemen, something that we believe is unjustified. We believe that sinking down to the level of terrorists does not differentiate you or makes you terrorists yourself, ladies and gentlemen, and that is something that we oppose. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that within the global paradigm of justice, there is a trial, and you have the right to be questioned, ladies and gentlemen, but that does not mean that you go and you are tortured on the presumption that you might have been involved in something, ladies and gentlemen. There is a due process to legality which is attached and which is a principle that any state upholds, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that they are compromising on that, and what they're doing is that they're saying that the state can essentially take anyone in, anyone that it doesn't like, ladies and gentlemen, and question them or torture them even for that matter, and commit gross violations of human rights in and of themselves. But what else did they talk about? They said, you know what, we were very ambiguous about their definition to begin with, because they said, you know what, terrorists are people who commit acts of violence, and then one of their speakers said, you know what, murders are also terrorists, and people who talk about incitement to violence or hate speech is also something that is considered amongst terrorism. We believe, ladies and gentlemen, that there are sufficient mechanisms within the status quo which already deem these actions illegal to begin with. So you can still hold them accountable and jail these people. What is the point of torturing these people at the end of the day? When you have a due process, why would you want to compromise on that due process at the end of the day? Something that they still haven't shown to us, ladies and gentlemen. Then they talked about people committing genocide, and they said, you know what, if they commit genocide, we have the right to torture them. We believe, no, ladies and gentlemen, that is not true. Take the example of Slobodan Milosevic, ladies and gentlemen, who killed millions of people within Serbia, but was still taken to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and then convicted, ladies and gentlemen, and then sent to jail, but not tortured, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the due process of law that we're talking about. That is about the principal morality that a government and any state should uphold and not sink to the level of these terrorists themselves. Then, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the abuse of what governments do and the jurisdiction that they're giving these governments. Let's talk about 9/11, ladies and gentlemen, whereby which after 9/11 happened, the US government started taking people in on suspicion and torturing these people at the end of the day, which created resentment within the people. In UK, ladies and gentlemen, there was a law passed that said the UK government could take anyone in on the basis of suspicion. And 4 years later, that law in itself was revoked because the people said that that's not principally just, because you're taking people in on the basis of their ethnicity, on the basis of their looks, and you're deeming them terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that that value judgment that they give the state, the right to states to attach to any person, is unjustified, ladies and gentlemen, because that gives room of abuse, something that my second speaker already talked about, ladies and gentlemen. Then they talked about how if you do something against the government, say something against the government, that this government can take you in and say that, well, you're a terrorist and torture you. We believe that that applies in any case, ladies and gentlemen, whereby which even under their model, if you live in a capitalist state and you have communist ideas, ladies and gentlemen, by their definition, that state can take you in and start torturing you simply because of the views they hold. Therefore, that is a restriction on your right to expression, ladies and gentlemen, something that they're propagating under their model, something that they started to propagate from the very get-go, ladies and gentlemen. Lastly, they talked about torture and how that's going to achieve a purpose. We believe, no, that's not justified because Guantanamo Bay hasn't been successful in averting all disasters. B, you lose the potential to get information when you torture them because they potentially lose their memory. And C, ladies and gentlemen, you compromise human rights at the end of the day, something that we've been upholding and something that they haven't refuted. And for all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, please vote for Team LGS.
welcome their first speakers.
When millions died, there was a team that didn't do anything. It took too long to respond to the terrorist threat, and furthermore, we saw that they didn't give us a mechanism of how they were going to really promote human lives and whether or not their civil liberties would be absolute and upheld in their case. We saw that they didn't deal with the full spectrum of the cases and scenarios that we saw terrorists operated under in today's world. There was a characterization of, yes, a suicide bomber, which both sides really couldn't do about when he was at the train station. But there was also the case of people hiding out in terrorist cells where people knew where they were, and if only you had the intelligence to deal with it, you could. They only clashed with us on one mechanism, that on torture. For wiretapping, surveillance devices, about banning terrorist rhetoric, about detention without trial, most of these areas weren't dealt with to the practical extent. So we saw that they agreed with us on the danger of terrorism, yet they didn't have a response as to how they're going to uphold the rights of civilians in the long run on their side. So in opposition's vote, what do we see? They were grossly scared of government negligence. They were grossly scared of governments abusing power. However, we really contextualized this debate to liberal democracies where citizens had the right to say that the country was doing something wrong, our rights and civil liberties are being curtailed, we need to regulate this in a different fashion. This sort of thing was what we stood for on our side. They didn't clash with us on this area. So whether or not it was fair to not curtail these civil liberties, let's look on the other side. They really saw that reasonable restrictions were going to take place, which was a shift from their first speaker. By their second speaker, they considered that hate speech could be banned. By their third, they also said that freedom of security cameras could be used, that surveillance cameras could be used to actually monitor whether or not a bomb was going to be spent. So basically, they didn't have any idea of what the limits of privacy, what the limits of civil liberties really were. So we saw a principal shift from their side, and we weren't clear on this. Secondly, were they going to help the fight against terrorism? On the side of opposition, what we saw was a weak fight, because all they did was retributive justice. In a court of law, when you couldn't do anything else, what were you going to do? All you can do is take it out on the person on the stand. But you leave many terrorists out there still operating, not dealt with. So we saw that there are substantive points about the subjectivity of the organizations and ambiguity of government processes was going to be taken down on our side because we had civil courts. We had abilities of citizens to restrict the rights of government in having full violations of these civil liberties. On opposition, we saw a side that was shifty enough to make some of your civil liberties disappear entirely, and yet not provide a proper mechanism and regulation as we did on our side, which would fight the terrorists to the bitter end. Now to the opposition side, what did we show you? We showed you a different model where you had many tools to deal with the terrorist organizations. Many of the tools like surveillance, wiretapping have been used countless times to be proven in our trend analysis of the different examples of Israel's Mossad after the 9/11 attacks. What did intelligence do? They improved the lives of people by protecting them from these terrorists. So, was it fair to curtail civil liberties? We saw that my point about the protection of rights wasn't adequately dealt with on their side, as they considered that people needed to be saved in the end. We saw that on our side, we saw that value of the life was more important than just some of the justifications for people who have already committed these crimes or who are definitely under our metrics that we've set out to you, which is regulated strictly by the government, will be ensuring that these terrorists were the ones, and they were the ones we have to question to and ask whether or not they were actually doing anything further to harm our civilians. On our practical side, we've proven to you that we're going to find out who these terrorists are, preempt these things, something that they didn't deal with on their side, which they couldn't preempt when the next terrorist attack was. We actually managed to preempt this. We've shown you countless of examples, and we've shown you how we minimize the harm to civilians and recognize the people who would actually deny us our ultimate liberty to life. So what do you want in this debate in the end? What you wanted was a side which would evolve to defeat the terrorists in the end. What you wanted was a side which was preemptive and making sure that the real justice was being dealt with. Rather, if you go with side opposition, what you have is a languished and broken, defeated society, which will have to crumble to the terrorist whims and fancies. So if you wanted this motion to stand, please go side opposition.